Hey there folks. So in our previous video I was playing around with that little gunslinger character and getting them to basically have a key input that when we pressed it they would attack. Now that was great, they did have a little bit of an attack, they could press that button, they could fire their gun, but what I want to show you now is how we can actually start linking specific events to an animation. So for example, our gun, when we fired the gun it was very much just the fire the bullet, and there was only 2 or 3 frames of actually us shooting it. And it's very easy to just say, well, the bullet would just fire immediately, potentially, or after 1 or 2 frames. So what I've done is I've got this widow character, and this is one of those kind of 2D character assets that I've got downloaded, and I've set it up as a base character. Eventually this would probably end up being one of my boss characters, one of my enemies, but I've used all of the things we've gone through so far to basically make this a playable character. So you can see here I've got left and right movement, and I've also set up inputs for attacks. So I've got the left mouse button doing a slam attack, and I've got the right mouse button doing a projectile fire attack. And the idea of why I picked these is because, as you can see, there's much more kind of emphasis on that kind of slow timed basis of our animation. So what we would be looking for is, if I press the left mouse button now, what we wouldn't want is I press it and immediately a damage attack happens in front of us. If we watch what happens with our animation, we want it to be at the point that that actual kind of claw slams down onto the floor. So what we're going to start looking at now is how we can take not just a override animation, but an override animation which uses the particular frame to do the effect and starts looking at locations so we do the damage at the point of the slam or whatever effect. And just to show you, you can see here I'm inside of this widow character, this boss character I've created. I've got some movement for the side scroller stuff we've already seen. And then I've set up these primary attack kind of events. So you can see here I've got the primary attack event that we've done before. I've added in an additional branch to check this. So rather than just going, is my character not attacking, I've also added in an and bool. And the purpose of this is basically saying if all of the booleans that are going into here are true, then that's when this will fire off as true. So if any of these are coming back as false, well then this will still also come out as false. So I need all of the rules to be being met. And what I've done here is I've basically had that if I am not jumping, we can go and add that as a boolean inside of our jumping functionality. If I am not already attacking, so I can't just keep on hammering the attack action to happen, and I've also contacted my character movement component here to find out whether I'm falling, because jumping and falling are not necessarily mutually exclusive. We could be falling by falling off a ledge, and I don't necessarily want my character to stop in the air. And that's for this specific widow. Maybe you do want that. Maybe you want your character to be able to start descending and then to be able to do some hack and melee attacks while they're falling down. So obviously don't copy exactly what's here. Think about what your character specifically should and shouldn't be able to do when it comes to attacking. What are the rules that govern whether attacking is allowed? So I've added these in as this comparison check, and obviously said, well, if that's being met, then we are allowed to attack. I've got the event to stop my character moving because I don't want this boss kind of spider to start sliding across the floor. So he's going to stop. He's going to do his override, which you can see targets the anim instance. And then immediately he's going to start a cooldown timer, and then that's going to obviously reset him being able to walk and being able to attack again. And the exact same thing happens on the secondary. I've basically got the exact same functionality going through here, except that this time it does the shooting attack. It still uses the same attack cooldown, but I could create a second timer handle. So this could be a primary and a secondary one. It could be a primary and a secondary cooldown timer if each attack needs to be individual. But for now, that means that when I press the left mouse button, he does this attack, and the right mouse button, he does that attack. So let's go and have a look inside of his animations and what we need to do. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my ZD source for this, and I'm going to start having a look at the actual attack itself. So what attacks have I got? Well, I've got this stomp attack. And what you'll see is that when we access and enter this, you'll see that it plays along these frames, and I can slow this down to look at the specific frames of what's happening. And as I said, we've got this kind of element of anticipation, building up, and this point here on frame 4, this is where we actually want to do the damage. So what we don't want to do is damage our character right away. And this is where you get not only a kind of unrealistic experience where you're like, why have I took damage? He hasn't even done an attack yet. But also, we don't really get a good user experience and play experience for the player because they've not had these moments here to be able to anticipate and wait for this. And this is where it's really useful going into those kind of attacks and looking at this and going, well, he's attacking really, really quickly. Maybe I need to go into here and, those first few frames where he's bringing up his attack, maybe I need to increase the frame run for a couple of these. Yeah, so you can see here, just increasing that. Just those extra few moments, you can see he pulls it up and then prepares and then slams down. So the bit where it comes down, very quick, obviously very quick effect as it hits the floor, but that anticipation bit builds up, and that's where you get that really great moment of the player being able to spot that and dodge, move, attack themselves to kind of break that attack. If we don't have that, well, then they're not going to know how to stop this. They're not going to know what's actually hurt them. So I've put that into there. And what we can see now is my attack's gone from the 16 frames that it was to obviously up to 22. That means that actually my attack isn't happening at 4 now. Now it's happening on 8. Now, how do I get it that after 8 frames, it starts doing the damage over here? Well, what we can do is we can right click on this notifies track that exists here, and we've got a bunch of options. Now, this is going to be a slightly longer video because I'm going to show you a bunch of different ways of doing this, and it's going to be up to you to decide what the best way to do it is. I'm going to show you the really quick and easy way, and then after that I'm going to show you the more advanced modular reusable way, which I actually prefer and I think I would recommend that you always do. So the first one is this add notify. What we're going to do here is we're going to either create a new notify, or we're going to go into here and we're going to use some pre-made ones. Now the pre-made ones, we've got play Niagara particle effect, play particle effect, play sound. I'm just going to show you what they are, and they're okay. Play Niagara effect, you can see that it adds a point on that frame, and you can see here it says this is the Niagara system I'm going to play, this is the location and the rotation offset for it in the world and the scale, and you can obviously add a socket name to this. We can rename this to be a specific actual kind of effect, but we can also add a socket, and we'll look at sockets in a future video to say, like, where should this appear, like where should this effect appear. Now I don't really need to do this because my character actually has the animation built in, but maybe you've got a separate animation. At that point you have to think with 2D, is it a 2D kind of Niagara system that I am creating, or is it a blueprint actor that creates and contains a sprite or a flipbook? So this one, because it's contained in the pixels, because it's contained in the actual character, Niagara effects isn't going to actually be very useful for me. The other one is we've got this play sound, and you can see when I add this one, it gives me a play sound notify, and this means that basically this sound file that's here will be played with this volume and this pitch at this point. Again, very good, but it's not very modular. If I build it here and go into any of these others, so for example, spit attack, there's nothing in here. If I go into, for example, the landing smash attack that he does, well, there's nothing in there either. So these are fine and they will work. You can do the notifies, you can do the Niagara and the sound notifies, but they only work on that specific character, on that specific source, on that specific animation for that frame. So they're not very reusable. So feel free to use them, and you can go to new notify and you can do the same thing here. You can make a custom notify, but it's going to have those exact same boundaries and constraints on it. So you can see here, let's do this as primary attack effect. You can see I've created a new notify, and this one, rather than actually saying anything about, what does this do? Well, it doesn't do anything in here. It doesn't actually play a Niagara effect. It doesn't play a sound, but what it's doing is it's passing a message to say that this needs to happen at this point. Now you can drag it onto the frame, and that is fine. What I have found that sometimes, depending on the actual game that you're playing, it sometimes helps to just make it just a little bit to the right, just to make sure that the frame change happens and then recognizes the notify. But that's something just to play with for yourself to see whether just that slight little bit of movement gives you enough time to do that. Now, where has that actually gone to? Because there's nothing over here, there's nothing over in this details panel. Well, if we go into our Widow character here and we go look at their animation blueprint, and we go into the event graph for that animation blueprint, what we will see is I've got, the basics that we've already done. We've initialized, we've got a reference to our Widow, and on tick, I'm basically checking whether it's a valid reference, and I'm getting, the velocity, the speed, the is falling and such, so that I can use this to decide what goes on inside of our actual kind of idle and walk over here. So there's nothing really going on that's incredible on this. But one of the things that you will notice is that we have this receive notify primary attack effect. So what this has done is it's created a new function inside of the animation blueprint And you can see I can add this in as this function, and any logic that goes into here, well, that's going to be the effect that happens on that particular frame when that notify runs. So that is good, it's useful, but there is another question that now you need to have and say, well, do I want to keep on doing all of my logic here inside of the animation blueprint? Things like getting the targets, doing damage and applying damage to those targets. Should that happen inside of the animation blueprint, or should it happen inside of my character? Well, really, that should happen inside of the character where all of the logic is for pressing the button and doing the attack, rather than having it all inside of the animation. The animation really here should just communicate back to the character. So one of the things that we could do is we could obviously get a reference to our widow pawn, and we could then call events inside of there, which again, it's fine, but I find that this is not as good as just talking directly to the widow, the character that we have, and also it's not really reusable, because if I had to do this for every single one of my characters, this is the primary attack effect. Well, if I've got, like, look at all these other characters. If I go and have a look at the flamer character, he's got this flame attack. So you can see here, the flame, that's his primary attack. So at some point in this looping thing here, and here and here, I want him to do some flame damage. I've got characters like the spitter, and at some point you can see here he's going to attack. There we go. So at this point in his animation, probably there, I want him to spit out a projectile. So this is where we take a step back from this one specific actor and this one specific piece of functionality and go, could I make this more modular? Could I make this reusable? Well, maybe I've got 15, 20, 100 different enemies. If I look at those enemies, could I define their systems by just saying they each have a primary attack effect? And then inside of each one of those, that's where we define what it is that they actually do. A ghoul might do a melee attack, whereas the spitter might shoot, whereas the summoner might spawn and create other ones of those. And the widow in this case is actually a combination, because he has all three of those. He is a boss that's going to go at the end of a level, which tests you on all of the logic you've just learned from fighting those three different types of enemies on the way to that. So we can use this, and this is okay, but I tend to not like using these ones. And one of the things to just think about is, can I use this in other animations? Probably not. So we're not going to look at this. Instead, what we're going to look at now is how to make our own custom animation notifiers. And for that, we're going to actually start introducing the concept of using interfaces as well. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go back into our content drawer, and I'm going to go and find my core kind of folder, because this is something that I'm going to create that's going to be reusable and modular across the whole of my project. And I'm going to start with two things. I'm going to need the notifies, the things that we've just created, but instead of building them in the animations, I'm going to build a separate blueprint element of them. And I'm going to need a blueprint interface that is going to allow me to communicate between the notify and the thing using it. So what I'm going to do, in my core folder, I'm going to create a new folder, and we'll call this one Animations. And inside of there, I like to keep this really tidy, so I'm just going to go with Notifies. Now, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to go to Blueprint Class, and rather than any of these basic ones, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in at the bottom, so if you need to expand out all classes, I'm going to search for Notify. And you're going to see a bunch of different notify ones. And you see here this anim notify, this is the 3D version of this. So all the logic that you're going to learn here for how to make a paper ZD 2D notify, you could apply that exact same logic and that exact same approach to making your 3D games in the future. So we've got animation notify. We've also got an anim notify state. We're going to cover those in a future video. And if I just minimize those two, underneath that, you'll see that we have a paper ZD anim notify base and a paper ZD anim notify state. So we have the exact same versions of these two, but done as paper ZD versions instead. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually inherit from our paper ZD anim notify base rather than the custom one that we've got here. I'm going to go from notify base, and as I said, we will come back to state in the future. So let's stick with just the notify itself. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to go to the one below it, not the base one, this one below it, and we go select, and this is going to create me this actor. So we're going to go with animation notify. This will be our primary attack. And in fact, let's duplicate that. And the second one, we'll show how quickly and easy these are going to be to build. This one can be our secondary attack. Now, what do we need to do in here? So I'm going to open up the primary attack. Notice it's this big cube with this little exclamation mark, and we'll compare this to the state version in the future. But if I open up this, you'll see it's basically an event graph. There's nothing else going on in here. There's no events, there's no functions. We can create variables, but the thing we want to do is we want to go to the functions, and you see there are two overridable functions. So we click on this drop down. Now the get display name, it's not very useful. It's just going to get us the name of this notify, and we're not really going to use that right now to create any of our logic. But this on receive notify, this is basically going to allow us to say that when this notify gets run or gets called, this is the event that's going to trigger. So you can see here we've got this anim owning instance. This is the paper ZD anim instance, and this is going to allow us to talk to that animation blueprint. But also, if we know who has the animation blueprint on them, well, then we could talk to them specifically. So what can I do here? Well, the first thing I would do is I want to say, let's get the owning actor. Because if we think about this, this paper ZD anim instance is the animation blueprint. This is the opposite of what we do with our characters over here. So where we're saying, let's get the animation component, get the anim instance, and then target down to target the animation, we're going to go the opposite way, and we've got the anim instance, and we're going to get the animation component and the character, the actor that owns that. So this obviously goes into a component. We want the owning actor, so that is going to be our character, the one that runs the animation blueprint. Now this is obviously coming out as an actor reference. So one of the things that you could do is you could use a cast. You know, if you've got one specific base character class that everything has this from, you could use that. And obviously then if you've got primary attack, secondary attack and functionality like that, that happens in every single one of your inherited characters, then brilliant. Just use the cast, communicate to them. But what you definitely don't want to have is, okay, well I need to cast and check, is it the widow? And if it's not the widow, well, what if it is the spitter? Or the ghoul, or any of the other types of enemies that I have. And we definitely don't want to create some kind of cast chain where each fail goes off to another one. And that's where our blueprint interfaces are going to come in handy. Because what we're going to be able to do here is pass a message to this owning actor and not necessarily know what it is, but pass a message to just tell it to do something. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into my blueprints folder. I'm going to create a new folder called interfaces. And inside of here, I'm going to go blueprint interface, and I like to call mine BPI for blueprint interface, and we'll just call this one for now actions. Okay, so now let's open this up, and what we'll see is that we've got the ability to add a function, but it does say here these are read only. So if you don't already know about interfaces, think about these as kind of like a reference, a labeling of functions that we can call, communications that we can make to an actor, but they don't actually contain any functionality. What we do is we pass that message to them, and then we let them decide what it is they do with that. Well, even if they do anything at all, because if something doesn't implement the interface, then it doesn't do anything at all. So I like to go with I underscore on my, just so I can see the difference between custom events and my interface events. And this one, what we'll do is primary attack, and I'm going to put this as primary attack effect, because it's not actually the primary attack itself, the physical action. That's being done by the input key. This is the effect of that. It's what happens when that big claw from the widow slams down on the floor. It's when we fire the gun as our ranged gunslinger character, and we make the projectile appear. Or our kind of melee character, the hunter, and other characters that we had with swords. Every time they swing the sword, it's the effect of actually doing the damage to the thing in front of them. So that's all I need really with this one. But actually what I'm going to do while we're here, I'm just going to add in my secondary attack effect. And you'll see how easy this is to start getting all these things set up. And I'm just going to spell it correctly. Now, I could add some inputs into here and outputs if I needed them. But for now, this is just to pass a message over. So now what we'll do is we'll go back to our primary attack effect. And what we're going to do is rather than communicating with this by trying to find out what it is and casting, what I can now do is I can do a message. So I can call with my blueprint interface, I can call and send a message to this owning actor to say, I don't know what you are, but I want you to run this interface event. And you can see there it says this does nothing if the target does not implement the required interface. So this is basically saying if you have this interface, well then run it. What we could do is we could do a little bit of an is valid node. just in case. This is just good practice, just to be like, okay, just in case this thing doesn't exist, because we don't want to run an interface message on something that doesn't exist, although it won't really cause us many problems, because as we just said, if it doesn't implement it, well, if it doesn't exist, then it won't do anything. But it's just good to make sure that it definitely exists, and if it does, we just pass over that message. Now, if we know that we can do that, we can do the exact same thing, obviously, on the secondary. And this is how easy these things are to set up. So if I go back onto the onReceiveNotify, we can say get owning actor. We can do an isValidCheck. And again, this might be that we might do it from this one rather than the one coming in. So we could actually just check that the actor exists. I think that'd be a better way of doing it. And then secondary attack. And notice that it's got the little message symbol in the top right corner. That shows that this is an interface message that is being called. So yeah, let me just actually put this one into there. And I think that will be just a little bit safer for us. We'll make sure that that owning actor definitely exists. And if it does, then we will run the primary attack effect on there. Okay, so 2 more things that we need to get done on this one. Now, at this point, we have an animation notify. We have a blueprint interface, which communicates through the animation notify to the owning actor, which is going to obviously be our character or our enemy, whatever it is going to be. So now what we need to do is we need to say, how do we call this notify and how do we make this attack effect actually run? Well, we'll do the calling of the notify in here, and we'll make sure that once that runs and passes this message, it maybe prints out on the screen. And then in a future video, we'll do the effects of what each of these attacks might do. So let's go and do this notify first. To do that, we're going to go back all the way to the start to our ZD source. Now, we already know that if we get all the way to frame 8 here, you can see that that's when he does his attack. So obviously, go through your animations. Find the specific one as you scroll through where you want the effect to happen. So at this point, I want him to slam and do damage on the floor in front of him. So this is where my notify needs to exist. So if I go in here and I right click, we already know that the add notify had those pre-made options and the default option, but now in this list you'll see that those pre-made ones are also accompanied by our custom animation notify effects. So animation notify primary attack, animation notify secondary attack. So I can plug this in here, and now this character at this frame will run this notify. Well, what does that do? That goes and accesses this, which says you just received this notify. So let's get the owning actor, which is the widow, check that it exists, and then tell it to do the attack effect. Now that should be nice and reusable and modular, to the point that if I actually had other characters, so for example, my flamer character here on the attack effect, you can see that I can say, when does he do his attack? Probably around frame 3. Now this is going to be a little bit different because I want his to be a duration event, so actually it would be better with a state. But just to show you that it exists, you can see I can right click, add notify, and those same ones are there. But when it calls and uses the interface event, it communicates with the owning actor. So in the owning actor of this one, it's going to be the flamer guy. He's going to get told to do his effect, so he could do whatever this flame effect is. Whereas obviously our widow will be slamming his claw down on the floor. Okay, so that's definitely going to run at that point for us. And obviously, if you've got multiple swings, maybe your character swings their sword back and then forth, well, maybe you want to put multiple of these in, and you want to put one of them in for every single point that they actually do this animation effect. It means that one animation could call that notify multiple times. Now, what do we need to do? Well, we need to go to my widow character. So you can see here, let's go back to my widow demo, and you can see he's doing his primary attack. So when he does his primary attack, he sets his movement mode, calls the stomp attack that we've just been messing with, which is this one here. And at this point, when the notify happens, he's going to pass a message to this character. Now, if we just test this and do the stomp, nothing's going to happen. Nothing's going to happen because, again, if the actor doesn't implement the interface, it doesn't do anything. And that's usually the biggest bug, the biggest problem that people have. They go, why is this not working? Well, the recipient, the thing that's being told to do something has to implement the interface. So we're going to go up, go to our class settings, and we're going to go over here to interfaces, and we're going to look at what implemented interfaces we have. Well, actually at the moment, no interfaces. So we go add, and because I call mine BPI, they'll always be just here, just outside of the scroll, and we'll put BPI actions. That'll now appear in this list. You can see it's there. But also, if we go over to the left hand side, you'll see now there is an interfaces section that has been added, and inside of there, each of those functions that we created in there is now available for us to add. And because I didn't add any outputs, because it was just an input event that ran, these, if I go over to them and right click, you can see I can implement an event. And when I do, you'll see this little BPI symbol, the interface symbol above it. It says what interface it's coming from. And you can see I can do the exact same for my secondary. And if I just drag off of this and say print string, we can say attack. Actually, let's put it as primary attack effect. And we can do the exact same with the secondary one. And we could say this is a secondary attack effect. Now, obviously I haven't implemented the notify onto that one, so let's just jump over to our spit attack and think what he's doing. Well, at this point, this is where I want him to spit and fire. So we just right click, add it, and secondary attack. And I probably want a little bit more anticipation here. Maybe as he goes back like that, maybe he wants to hold on that frame for a couple of moments before he fires off. And what we should now see is that when we press that button, so if I press the left mouse button, he stomps and primary attack effect happens. But notice here, I'm going to click, and it's at the point that he slams down. That's the point that he does that primary attack effect. Same with the shooting, so the right mouse button here, and he doesn't do it immediately. Yeah, you can see that he waits for a frame or so. So this is going to give you a lot more control. This is going to allow you to now start saying, okay, well, if I am using attacks on my character, so for example, let's go back to the Widow. If I'm using particular specific attacks on my character, when should the effect happen? Yes, you can add a notify, and yes, you can go and use all these ones that kind of exist here inside the ZD source. But could you break down your characters and their designs into simple, basic functionalities that they do? So with lots of my enemies, what I tend to do is I have things, and with my characters, things like primary attack, secondary attack, main special, secondary special, first, second, third specials, things like death, hits, and things like that. If there's particular things that they need to do, that's when I'm going to do that. And what you can do is then you can reuse those across anything that you've got. So, okay, a ranged character, their primary attack is they fire the bow. A melee character, their primary attack is they swing their sword or use their melee weapon. And it makes your systems far more reusable and far more modular. And one last little bonus thing just to finish off here. Not necessary for actually any of the functionality, but it's something that you might notice and it might annoy you. So if you followed through all the tutorial stuff we've just been doing, if you do create your own custom notifies, so if you think about what I've just done here with the ZD source, if I go into here and I right click and go add a new notify, as we just saw, what it does is it creates this notify function that exists in here. So I've deleted it out of my ZD source, and I could try and delete it out of here, but there is no way of removing it once it's out. And that obviously, if you make mistakes, if you need to change them, if you don't use them anymore, that's going to get really frustrating because you create things you can't get rid of. So what we need to do is we need to go into our ZD source itself. And if you go to the tools option up at the top, this level tools, sorry, not tools, window, go to window and then go down and you'll see there's an option here called source notifies. So these are the custom animation notifies that exist in this source. So we add that in, and then you'll see there's a whole bunch of options here, and the primary attack effect, the one that I just created, is existing here. So from that, I can then go to that and delete, save it, go back to my animation blueprint and compile it, save it, and it's gone away. So if you do create ones that you don't need anymore, obviously you can just get rid of them that way. Just remember that it's a thing in window under source notifies that is hidden away by default. You just have to show it. Thanks for watching, folks. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider subscribing to access more of my Unreal Engine content.